Good evening to you all, and let's start again with the lectures on law of sea and maritime law. This is week 3, lecture 3. And in the previous lectures, we were discussing in detail about the straits and the types of straits. So, today we will continue with the discussion on the strait, and I would like to briefly introduce that so far as the straits are concerned, they are international transit passage, or they are the water bodies that connect to bigger water bodies like sea or on one side and exclusive economic zone on other side. And the strait is basically a narrow passage which borders certain countries that can be termed as the coastal states, and that narrow passage of the sea allows the movement of the ships to enter into, or let's say to link themselves with the sea or the exclusive economic zone. But the thing is that in case of the status of the strait, which that water body does have, it is regulated by international law, and it's usually free for the movement of the ships. So, the coastal states, they cannot put the limitations or they cannot restrict the movement of the ships, although they are bordering the strait area, but the movement of the ships is almost like a free passage for them, until unless there are some presumptions or with some evidences. So, coming again now with the discussion on this strait area, and one of the strait is island forming strait. So, the regime of non-suspendable innocent passage applies in the straits that are formed by an island of the state bordering the state and its mainland, where there exists seaward of the island a route through high sea / exclusive economic zone of similar convenience concerning navigational and hydrographical characteristics. The Strait of Messina, bordered by Sicily and mainland Italy, is an example of this type of strait. There is no right of overflight through such straits. Yesterday we have discussed, or in the previous lectures we have discussed a lot about the strait, China and Taiwan, and today we will take this example of the Italian strait. Now, here we need to see one important position. This is the strait area, Strait of Messina, and this is Italy and this is Sicily, and this is a narrow passage of water body that connects this Ionian Sea with the Tyrrhenian Sea. Now, in the cases where, and this is island basically, so it's a part of the Italy itself, it's not two different nations. So, but the other situation can be like we have discussed yesterday. There can be two different nations, and in between those nations there is a strait that links the sea area or the exclusive economic zone area, like in case of China, Taiwan, Japan, Taiwan. And in that situation, the flight over that strait area is permissible if it is broad. Okay, if it's quite broad, the air passage is permissible. But in some cases, neither flight is permissible nor the movement of submarines underneath the water is permissible. And here in this case, since this island also belongs to Italy, that means it's through the same country that this strait connects the sea area. So, therefore, they have restricted the flight, the international aviations. And secondly, the movement of the submarines underneath this water is also restricted, and that is all because of the security concerns that the strait does not become some kind of threat to this. The movement of the ships across this strait does not become threat to the nations. So, that is what we try to define, that different kind of rights are there when we are discussing the application of international law in the strait. So, there is no one such general rule. It differs depending upon the positions and also the geographical or the hydrographical situations. So, here the example of Strait of Messina is one such. Bordered by Sicily and mainland Italy is an example of this type of strait. There is no right of overflight through such straits. Next is archipelagoic straits. What are archipelagoic? They are the small islands across the mainland, and sometimes within those islands there are bigger islands also. But the important question here is that how to draw a baseline from the archipelagoic area. So, usually the baseline is drawn from the outer stretch of that archipelagoic area, and after drawing the baseline we draw the territorial sea, and after territorial sea further we draw the contiguous zone. But when we draw the strait area, we need to consider whether we should allow the free passage for the movement of ship across the territorial sea area or not. So, then that becomes conditional sometime. conditioned upon the rights of the coastal state, but in certain cases, as we were discussing yesterday, that this strait is sometimes partly used for international navigation and partly it has the geographical status. That means it's partly within the territorial sea area and partly it's outside the territorial sea area domain and is used for international navigation. This situation arose because earlier the territorial sea area was confined until 3 nautical miles, up till 3 nautical miles, but later on after this UNICLOS 1982, it has been extended up till 12 nautical miles. So, now coming to this archipelagoic state, international states that are located within archipelagoic waters are subject to navigational regime of ASLP. ASLP is Archipelagoic Sea Lane Passage. Examples of archipelagoic state Indo-Pacific include the Balabac Strait, which connects South China Sea, the Sulu Sea and the Sunda and Lombok Straits, which connects the Java Sea and the Indian Ocean. Archipelagoic Sea Lane Passage applies within the archipelagoic waters and adjacent territorial sea, whether or not that archipelagoic state has designated archipelagoic sea lanes and is virtually identical to the transit passage. So, we take here the example of that archipelagoic sea. So, this is Balabac Strait. Now, here there are actually, this is Sulu Sea and this is South China Sea. So, this Balabac Strait connects the South China Sea with the Sulu Sea, and these are the group of islands which we term as archipelagoic area. And here we can see that how to draw, and here also these are some islands. So, how to draw the territorial waters area or how we define the extent of territorial claims by these two lands. That becomes important when we are trying to determine the transit passage, that the transit passage means here the strait area. Another example of archipelagoic area is you can see here Philippines. It's all with group of islands, and another country is Malaysia. So, how do we connect this Malaysia and Philippines when there are so many islands forming this country? So, how we will draw the territorial waters firstly. So, they have taken the outer stretch of the bigger island. You see here this is the outermost stretch. So, from this all is the part of Philippines. That means it can control the water up till this area. Similarly, this island belongs to Malaysia, but this island belongs to Philippines. This is how it is drawn. Now, so far as this distribution of islands are concerned, they are this might be the question for the listeners here, how these islands are distributed. That all becomes on the historical basis, that how historically these islands have been controlled or who was controlling these islands. So, based on that the distribution is made. Sometimes the court of arbitration decides these matters, whether the countries that are claiming those islands, they are the rightful claimant or not. But this is an example of archipelagoic country, like here we see this Philippines, where there are group of islands. So, archipelagoic sea lane passage applies within archipelagoic waters and adjacent territorial sea, whether or not the archipelagoic state has designated archipelagoic sea lanes and is virtually identical to transit passage. So, archipelagoic sea lane passage is the exercise of the rights of navigation and overflight in normal mode of operation solely for continuous, expeditious and unobstructed transit through archipelagoic waters. Again, I take the example here, this example, like if someone has to take the route from South China Sea to this Sulu Sea, they will have to use this Balabac Strait that remains unhindered. Or someone has to take a flight from this Borneo to this Palawan, so they can take the flight from this way above the strait area. So, that is what it means. The rights of the coastal state, they remain unrestricted. Not only the rights of the coastal state, but other neighboring state also, they can use the overflight area of this strait. All military and commercial ships and aircraft enjoy the right of archipelagoic sea lane passage while transiting through under or over archipelagoic waters and adjacent territorial sea via all normal passages routes used as routes for international navigation or overflight. So, basically the rights are quite broad in nature. That means they are not restrictive, only confined to the rights of the coastal state, but they are more concerned about the international community. So, therefore, the rights of the strait area or the transit passage are defined in a very wider terms, allowing the navigation of commercial ships, even military ships and aircraft enjoy the right of archipelagic sea lane passage, but this is applicable in case of archipelagic sea lane passage, not in the cases where there is a the state, island state, like we have taken the example of Italy and Sicily. So, that is why I would like to again mention here that this depends upon country's position, it depends upon the geographical context also, or hydrographical context. So, one rule is not uniformly applicable everywhere. While transiting through or under over archipelagic waters and adjacent territorial sea via all normal passage routes used as routes for international navigation or overflight. Then is dead end straits, because they meet the end point, it is not like always open passage. So, dead end straits like the Strait of Tiran connecting the high sea or exclusive economic zone with territorial sea of the state or states are subject to the regime of non-suspendable innocent passage, which guarantees foreign flagged vessel access to the state located in cul-de-sac end of strait. So, basically here the state meets the end point. So, that is why it is termed as dead end strait. The examples are here. Now, this is the Red Sea area and this is Saudi Arabia. So, you can see it very clear. These are small island, and this is Strait of Tiran. So, it allows like here from Red Sea to Gulf of Aqaba, but this Gulf of Aqaba then ends somewhere. Although this the strait of this Tiran, it gives passage up till the Gulf of Aqaba, and after this Gulf of Aqaba somewhere it ends here at Aqaba, that is touching this Israel, Jordan and Saudi Arabia border. Similarly, we can see here the Gulf of Suez. So, it ends somewhere at the Suez. So, there is an end point here. It is not that this finally this strait area will meet another bigger water body all across. On one direction it is meeting the bigger water body, in the other side again it is meeting another bigger water body, but not bigger to the extent that can be compared with a big sea area or an ocean, but again that is a narrower water body, for example it is a gulf or something like that, but that also ends connecting to some land area, bigger land area. So, that is what is termed again this state here, dead end states, like the Strait of Tiran connecting the high sea or exclusive economic zone with the territorial sea of the states are subject to the regime of non-suspendable. Again, it is a non-suspendable innocent passage which guarantees the foreign flagged vessel access to the state located in cul-de-sac end of the strait. Then is duties of the ships and aircraft during transit passage, because when we say that it's they have the free right to travel across those transit area, that does not mean they are totally free and they are not under an obligation, because this may often make the case for the security concerns of the coastal state, like China has always been raising the concern that why the US naval ships they are entering the Taiwan Strait. So, in that context, knowing from the historical past, the UNICLOS has included some obligatory measures that are supposed to be followed by the ships. So, they are termed here as duties of the ships and aircraft during the transit passage, covered under Article 39. So, ships and aircraft while exercising the right of transit passage shall proceed without delay through or over the strait. So, the first is that they need not to halt unnecessarily, or they do not to take extra time that is not expected from them in the usual course of the passage. So, they need to maintain what is reasonable. Firstly, we can put it like this. This applies both for the ships and aircraft that are flying above this transit passage area. So, ships and aircraft while exercising the rights of transit passage shall proceed without delay through or over the strait. Next is refrain from any threat or use of force against the sovereignty, territorial integrity or political independence of the states bordering the strait, or any other barrier in violation of the principles of international law embodied in the Charter of the United Nations. So, as repeatedly being said, that it is mainly the security concern, and that security concern should not be violated, neither there should be any such threat. So, here Article 39 clearly mentions that the ships or the aircraft, they need to refrain from any threat or the use of force against the sovereignty. It is not only that they need to refrain from military threat, but also against the sovereignty. That means they need to respect the political status of that particular country or the coastal states across which they are passing through. against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, that also covers the territorial integrity. That means they are not supposed to think, or so they are not supposed to raise the issues that are questioning the territorial integrity of the state, or that may lead to some kind of civil, let's say civil rebellion in that particular country, or there are chances that such passage being given may lead to some kind of independence movement in that country. So all the political uprising, that should be totally sidelined by when they are following the passage of the transit area. So sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of the states bordering the state, or in any other manner in violation of the principles of international law embodied in the Charter of the United Nations. Now, why it's mentioned like this, that when they are all across this strait area, they are not supposed to raise these issues, because that is not the right platform. That is what it means. They can raise such issues anywhere else, but this platform is simply meant for peaceful use of the sea, its resources, and peaceful movement of the ships across this transit passage. So any such behavior or any such action taken by the ship or the aircraft that may lead to either of these prejudices or these consequences, that should be refrained by those ships or the aircrafts. Refrain from any activity other than those incidents to their normal modes of continuous and expeditious transit, unless rendered necessary by force majeure or distress. So they have to follow just the normal and the reasonable behavior or the mode of conduct, and they may, in some urgency, they may take some expeditious transit, or they may take some urgency measures. For example, in force majeure, when there is some force, when they are forced by circumstance, distress, that is by natural reasons, they are compelled to take any such measures. So that will be considered as exceptions. But otherwise, what is expected from these ships and the aircraft is the reasonable behavior, the reasonable passage, the reasonable use of transit passage. So I again emphasize here, except for the force majeure or distress, that means when they are in urgency, and force majeure, that means when such urgency is called by the natural circumstances, or for some reason it's distress, like if the ship is maybe it requires heavy repair, or there is some damage to the ship and immediately it has to be taken to the port. So in that case, definitely that situation is different. Next is comply with other relevant provisions of this part. Ships in transit passage shall comply with generally accepted international regulations, procedures and practices for safety at sea, including international regulations for preventing collisions at sea. Because here the transit passage are usually narrow, like we have also discussed about the Pak Strait, that is bordering India and Sri Lanka. Then we have seen here the one Sicily and Italy, that is another such strait which is quite narrow, and there are several other examples. So there are chances of the collisions, and this collision is more frequent, or let's say the probability is high in the case when the ships are carrying the petroleum or the natural gas, because they are heavy and very bulky, the ships, and they may get collided with another ship during the time of stormy weather or when the ship is at its rough weather. So in those situations, they need to be extra cautious. So what is clearly mentioned here as per the provisions, they need to comply with generally accepted international regulations, procedures and practices for safety at sea. That safety is not simply safety against any aggression or against any piracy only, but it's also including the technical thing and maneuverability, including international regulations for preventing collisions at sea. Comply with generally accepted international regulations, procedures and practices for prevention, reduction and control of pollution from ships. Now, as per the latest regulations, and keeping in mind the environmental concern that now is becoming global norm, and that global norm is not simply confined to the practices at the state level or practices at the land when there is a, let's say, activities conducted in the land area, but that has its serious implications at the sea also. Therefore, any such shipping activity or any such movement of the ship that might lead to or that aggravates the pollution or that leads to any environmental hazard at the sea area or at that water body need to be prevented. So and that preventions, they are based on international conventions, and those registered ships, they are very well aware about those preventive measures they need to take when they are moving across the ship. One such example is those ships that are carrying this petroleum, or let's say this oil, what we term as here the crude oil. So how once the crude oil is all taken away, or it's it has been sent to the port of destination, and at the port of destination it has been all filled in another vessel. That means it all has been taken by the person or the company that has ordered it. So in what will be the consequence, or what will be the result of the remaining or just the leftover of the petroleum in that tanker that was carrying the crude oil? So in such cases, earlier the practice was those the leftover of the crude oil was thrown or discharged at the sea. But now, as per the practices, it's not permitted to discharge the leftover of the crude oil at the sea. Reason being because it affects the marine life. So now there will be another ship that will come closer to the oil container, and it will, or the oil tanker, and it will, both this oil container and the ship, they will be connected by the pipe, and that pipe will absorb all the remaining petroleum or the crude oil that is left. So instead of putting it, or let's say discharging it at the sea waters, it has to be sucked by another ship that is meant for these purposes. So that is one such example where they have tried to maintain some regulations. Next is aircraft in transit passage. Aircraft in transit passage shall observe the rules of the air established by International Civil Aviation Organization as they apply to civil aircraft. State aircraft will normally comply with such safety measures and will at all times operate with due regard for safety of the navigation. So there are separate guidelines meant for the civil aircraft, and those guidelines are through the International Civil Aviation Organization. So I repeat this: observe the rules of air established by International Civil Aviation Organization as they apply to the civil aircraft. Civil aircraft, and the other is the military aircraft. So civil aircraft mainly is both for the commercial and the passenger aircraft. State aircraft will normally comply with such safety measures and will at all time operate with due regard to the safety of navigation. Secondly, all times monitor the radio frequency assigned by the competent internationally designated air traffic control authority or the appropriate international distress radio frequency. So they need to be very well connected with the ground staff, and keep on tracking the signals that are being radioed to or that are delivered to them. So that kind of regulations, they are both in the interest of the aircraft and also in the interest of the coastal state, because that will create the trustship between the coastal state and the aircraft. Reason being, if they are very well connected through the frequency bandwidth, then whatever activity happens at the aircraft, or let's say whatever maneuverability is done by the aircraft, that will be recorded, and if there is any question to be asked from the pilot, the ground staff people, they can ask. The ground staff here means the coastal state neighboring the transit passage area, because they may be suspicious about the maneuverability of the aircraft, but if they are in contact with the pilot and they know that the pilot is doing all that in a good sense or in good faith, so there will be no such mistrust. So that has to be maintained when there is a aircraft flying above the transit passage. Article 43, navigational and safety aids and other improvements and the prevention, reduction and control of pollution. So user states and the states bordering a state should by agreement cooperate in the established and maintenance in the state of necessary navigational and safety aids or other improvement in aid of international navigation, and for the prevention, reduction and control of pollution from the ship. So it's becoming more and more stricter nowadays, and the UNICLOS has also included this. Otherwise, there are separate conventions with regard to different aspects of the environment and different aspects with regard to the pollution and prevention of pollution. So here Article 43 clearly states that the navigational and safety aids and other improvements and prevention, reduction and control of pollution, user states, that means those because that pollution will affect the coastal state, which is closer to that state area, the transit passage area. And it is it seems very simple when we talk about this, the pollution effect. But imagine that there is a coastal state through which closer to the strait area or through that transit passage, and there are frequent ships passing through that strait area, and as a result of it, the birds, the marine life, all that gets infected. And many a times if they are creating the pollution effect, or because of their movement there is a heavy pollution, or even sometimes there is an oil spill all across those areas, then just imagine what will be the effect on the birds, the marine life, all that is dependent upon that the strait area. So it's not simply so simple when we talk about this pollution and its effect. That need to be taken very seriously, and sometimes the economy of a particular country will get affected. Imagine when we talk about the Palk state, which is all closer to the India and Sri Lanka, and if they face this pollution effect, whereas Sri Lanka is very much dependent upon the natural resources from the sea, and not simply the natural resources, here the natural resources also includes the marine life. So if that gets affected by the pollution, what effect will be on the Sri Lankan economy? So there are many such examples, and also there are many such marine life, they are now listed in the endangered category. So keeping in mind all these challenges, the stronger measures need to be taken for controlling this pollution and its effect. So for now, I thank you very much for being part of this discussion. We continue further on this discussion, but thank you very much for now.